What if everything you know about Cleopatra was Roman propaganda? For over 2,000 years, her name has been synonymous with seduction. The siren of the Nile, the woman who brought two of Rome's greatest generals to their knees. But what if that version, the woman who enslaved men with her beauty, wasn't real at all? What if Cleopatra wasn't a temptress, but a tactician, a scholar, a linguist, a mathematician, and one of the most sophisticated political minds of the ancient world? What if the world's most famous femme fatale was actually the victim of the most effective smear campaign in human history, orchestrated not by scorned lovers, but by Rome itself? Because the real Cleopatra wasn't destroyed by love, she was erased by politics. Let's start with the image that stuck. The painted queen reclining on golden couches, wrapped in silk, drinking wine as empires crumble around her. That's not Cleopatra. That's Shakespeare's Cleopatra, Plutarch's Cleopatra, Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra. The real woman, Cleopatra the Seventh Philopator, was the last pharaoh of Egypt, the last ruler of the last great civilization of the ancient world before it was consumed by Rome. And yet, despite ruling one of the richest and most powerful kingdoms of her time, her story was written almost entirely by the men who conquered her, men who had every reason to twist her image into something dangerous, decadent, and ultimately disposable. So before we get to the fall, we need to understand the foundation, who Cleopatra actually was before history decided to turn her into a myth. Cleopatra was not fully Egyptian. She was Greek, specifically Macedonian, a descendant of Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander the Great's generals. When Alexander died in 323 BCE, his empire split apart, and Ptolemy claimed Egypt for himself, founding the Ptolemaic dynasty that ruled for nearly 3 centuries. By the time Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE, that dynasty had grown decadent and unstable. Her father, Ptolemy XII, was more interested in music and festivals than governance, and Egypt had become both fabulously wealthy and politically precarious. But Cleopatra was different. From childhood, she was known for her intellect, a prodigy fluent in mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and rhetoric. She spoke 9 languages, including Egyptian, Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Latin, a rarity among her dynasty, most of whom refused to even learn the native tongue of the people they ruled. That alone made her stand out. She wasn't just a monarch, she was a communicator, a connector between worlds. While Rome's leaders saw Egypt as a resource to exploit, Cleopatra saw it as a legacy to protect, and she was willing to outthink anyone who threatened it. When her father died, the 18-year-old Cleopatra inherited a fractured kingdom, one she was forced to share with her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. But the court was a viper's nest of rival advisors and Roman interests. Within months, Cleopatra was exiled from her own palace. And this is where her story stops being a romance and starts being a revolution. It's 48 BCE. Julius Caesar, fresh from his civil war with Pompey, arrives in Egypt in pursuit of his defeated rival. Pompey had sought refuge with Cleopatra's brother, who promptly had him murdered to gain Caesar's favour. Instead, it disgusted Caesar. The Roman general stayed in Alexandria to settle the Egyptian succession dispute, the perfect opportunity for Cleopatra to stage her return. But she couldn't simply walk back into her palace. Her brother's guards would have killed her on sight. So Cleopatra devised one of the most legendary political stunts in history. Under cover of night, she had herself smuggled through enemy lines rolled up in a carpet or according to other accounts, a linen sack, carried straight into Caesar's private chambers. When the carpet was unrolled, out stepped the exiled Queen of Egypt, draped in royal linen, defying the odds. That moment, retold for centuries as a moment of seduction, was actually an act of statecraft. Caesar saw not a temptress, but an ally, a woman of vision, educated in diplomacy, offering Egypt's wealth and stability in exchange for Rome's recognition. Cleopatra wasn't seeking romance, she was securing her throne. Within weeks, Caesar declared her the rightful ruler of Egypt. A brutal civil war followed, with Cleopatra and Caesar's forces defeating her brother's army. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile during his retreat, and Cleopatra reclaimed her throne, now with Rome's most powerful man as her partner in politics. Their alliance gave birth to a son, Caesarion, officially Ptolemy XV, but more importantly, it secured Egypt's independence, at least temporarily, from direct Roman annexation. Cleopatra had turned exile into empire. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra found herself once again at the centre of a political storm. The Roman world fractured into factions, led by Mark Antony and Octavian, Caesar's protégé and adopted heir. Both men sought legitimacy, resources and allies, and both looked to Egypt. Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus to explain her loyalty and her role in Rome's affairs. Most rulers would have arrived humbly, ready to plead. Cleopatra arrived like a legend. She sailed up the Cydnus River on a golden barge, its sails perfumed with incense. Her attendants dressed as nymphs and gods. It wasn't vanity, it was strategy. Antony was a man who revered spectacle and myth. Cleopatra knew that if she entered his world as a goddess, she would command it. And it worked. Antony was captivated, but not simply as a lover. He recognized in her a partner who could rival Rome's finest minds. For the next decade, Cleopatra and Antony would share both passion and power, co-ruling vast territories, launching campaigns to restore Egyptian dominance, and positioning their children as heirs to a new Greco-Egyptian empire that could challenge Rome itself. But that vision terrified Octavian. He needed to destroy Antony's image to secure his own power. And the easiest way to do that was to destroy hers first. Octavian was not a warrior like Antony or a scholar like Cleopatra. He was a propagandist. And in an era before social media, before printing presses, before even universal literacy, he waged one of the most effective disinformation campaigns in history, painting Cleopatra as the ultimate foreign villain. He flooded Rome with coins, speeches and pamphlets, depicting her as a manipulative Eastern temptress who had bewitched Antony and sought to enslave the Republic. Roman poets were commissioned to write of her sorcery and witchcraft. Statues and frescoes portrayed her as a serpent, a harlot, a foreign queen corrupting noble Roman blood. Every stereotype of the dangerous woman began here, in Octavian's smear campaign against a scholar who spoke 9 languages and ruled a nation. When Antony married Cleopatra and declared Caesarion, not Octavian, as Caesar's true heir, the smear became a declaration of war. Octavian convinced the Roman Senate that Cleopatra had enslaved Antony and planned to conquer Rome itself. In 31 BCE, his forces met theirs at the Battle of Actium. Antony and Cleopatra were defeated. They fled back to Egypt, surrounded by betrayal, propaganda, and the inevitable collapse of their empire. And in the ruins of Alexandria, Octavian's story became history. In 30 BCE, as Octavian's armies breached the walls of Alexandria, Cleopatra made her final calculation. She knew what capture meant: a Roman parade, humiliation, and the eternal label of defeated queen. According to tradition, she took her own life using the bite of an asp, the sacred Egyptian cobra. But even her death was rewritten to fit the Roman narrative. To Octavian, her suicide wasn't defiance. It was proof of guilt, proof that the wicked queen had met her just end. Her image was paraded through Rome, her tomb looted, her writings erased. Caesarion was executed, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended, and Egypt became a Roman province. The real Cleopatra, the polyglot ruler, the strategist, the scientist, the woman who once held the fate of empires in her hands, was buried under the weight of Roman propaganda. In the centuries that followed, she was transformed into a cautionary tale, the woman who destroyed men, rather than the ruler who dared to defy them. Every painting, play, and poem after that point carried Octavian's fingerprints. Even Shakespeare's immortal Antony and Cleopatra is built on the scaffolding of Roman lies. But if you strip away the politics and propaganda, a very different figure emerges. One who fought to preserve her nation's sovereignty in a world dominated by Rome's expanding shadow. Cleopatra didn't lose because she was reckless. She lost because she was too modern for her time. 2,000 years later, the propaganda still works. The idea of the seductive woman who destroyed powerful men hasn't gone anywhere. It's recycled endlessly in media, politics, and public life. Powerful women who lead with intelligence and confidence still face the same narrative trap Cleopatra did. Charisma becomes manipulation. Ambition becomes arrogance. Leadership becomes threat. Cleopatra's real crime wasn't seduction, it was sovereignty. She dared to rule, not as a puppet queen or a lover of Rome, but as an equal. And history couldn't handle that. Because when a man uses charm, he's a statesman. When a woman does, she's a scandal. Cleopatra's legacy reminds us that history isn't what happened, it's what survived the editing. And in this case, the editor-in-chief was Rome. Cleopatra didn't die a seductress, she died a strategist, a scholar fluent in the language of empires, a ruler who preserved her nation longer than any could have expected, a queen whose brilliance was buried under 2 millennia of Roman lies. So the next time you hear her name, not as a lover but as a leader, remember, history didn't misremember Cleopatra by accident. It was deliberate. Because when the victors write the history books, they don't just erase their enemies, they rewrite them.